An ordinary fishing trip turned into something unforgettable. What she found will change everything. Don't miss this story. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Eliza Morris rose before dawn as she had done for decades, her body moving with the rhythm of habit more than choice. The small cabin she called home creaked with the wind off the water, its boards weathered to the same gray as her hair. She paused in the quiet, listening to the slow breathing of the tide against the rocks. At 68, she had long since learned that silence could be both companion and burden. For her, it was mostly the first. She lit the small oil lamp and poured herself a cup of black coffee, its sharp bitterness anchoring her in the cool pre-dawn air. Outside, the world was still half asleep. The horizon carried only the faintest suggestion of light, a pale smear above the restless sea. She stepped out onto her porch, boots scuffing the worn boards, and looked across the water. It was the same view she had seen every morning of her life, yet never entirely the same. The sea changed with each breath, with each season, never allowing complacency. Her boat, the Siren, waited for her at the dock, its paint long faded but its hull solid and dependable. Eliza had kept it alive with her own hands, patching, sanding, mending ropes. The boat bore the weight of her years and her losses. The storm that had taken her husband and daughter so many years ago had left her with only this vessel and the sea itself. Since then, she had fished alone. The village was near enough, its cluster of houses visible in the distance, but Eliza's world had narrowed to the cabin, the dock, the Siren, and the vast expanse of water. As she sipped the last of her coffee, she thought of the stories her father once told by the fire, tales of the sea's hidden treasures. He spoke of wrecks that lay forgotten on the ocean floor, of artifacts from civilization swallowed by waves, of gifts the water gave to those who knew how to listen. Most had laughed at those tales, but Eliza had never fully dismissed them. The sea, she knew, was deeper than anyone's understanding, and it held more secrets than men could imagine. That morning, as she walked down to the dock, she felt something unusual. A pull, faint but insistent. The tide seemed to whisper to her, urging her toward the headland where the rocks jutted like black teeth into the water. It wasn't the season for fish there, not usually, but her instincts told her to follow. She loaded her nets with careful precision, checked the knots twice, and started the engine. The Siren pushed away from the dock with a low growl, carving its way into the misty channel. The fog clung low over the water, twisting into shapes that came and went with each swell. Eliza guided the boat with practiced ease, every shift of her hand matching the sea's pulse. The further she moved from shore, the stronger the sensation became. She tried to explain it away as a fisherman's hunch, but in her chest it felt like something older, deeper, like the tide itself had found her heartbeat. By the time she reached the headland, dawn had painted the horizon in pale gold. The water churned strangely here, forming eddies that curled and dissolved before her eyes. She cast her nets with the same precision she always had, but the pull that met her hands this time was different. Heavy. The ropes strained, the boat tilted, and her muscles burned as she fought against the drag. For a moment, she thought she had caught a shark, or perhaps a great tangle of kelp wrapped around stone. Her arms trembled as she hauled it up, inch by inch, the ropes creaking under the weight. Then, out of the water, something extraordinary broke the surface. It was no fish, no wreckage of a crate or broken mast. What glistened in the morning light was a shape unlike anything she had seen before. A massive object, curved and ribbed like a shell, yet metallic, gleaming with green and bronze hues beneath the slime of the sea. Barnacles clung to its sides, and strange engraved lines, almost symbols, ran along its surface. It looked ancient, older than any ship she had known, yet too perfect in its symmetry to be the work of chance. Her breath caught as she pulled it into the boat. The weight was immense, but the siren groaned and held. The object sat before her, dripping seawater that glistened like liquid glass, and for a long moment she could only stare. It was a chest, she realized, an enormous chest shaped like a seashell, its ridges marked with designs that seemed less carved than grown. Eliza's hand shook as she touched it. The metal was cold, but not lifeless. She felt a faint vibration beneath her fingers, as though something inside it resonated with the beating of her heart. Her father's stories returned in a rush, the sea's hidden treasures, the gifts it sometimes gave to those who endured its hardships. But this was beyond even the wildest tales. The fog thinned around her, sunlight catching on the water in sharp glimmers. The chest remained, silent but heavy with promise. Eliza knew in that moment that her life had shifted. Whatever secrets the sea had chosen to reveal, she had just taken the first step into them. And as she turned the siren back toward shore, the object secure in her nets, she felt the weight of destiny pressing on her shoulders, heavier than any catch she had ever brought home. Eliza's arms ached from the effort of hauling the strange chest aboard, but she scarcely noticed the pain. The thing sat heavy in the middle of the siren's deck, its curved shell-like surface glistening with seawater, its weight pressing the boat deeper into the swells. For a long time she did nothing but stare, her breath quick and uneven. She had seen wreckage before, driftwood, old nets tangled with rusted anchors, but nothing like this. This chest seemed both crafted and grown, as though the sea itself had shaped it with a purpose. The sun had risen higher by the time she guided the siren back into the harbor. Mist still clung to the headland, hiding what she had pulled from the deep, and Eliza was grateful for the cover. The village was stirring by the time she tied off at the dock, but the early risers paid her no mind. She kept her head low, her movements steady, hiding the strange prize beneath a layer of old tarpaulin. Even so, she felt the prickle of eyes on her back. Whispers traveled faster than tidewater here, and she knew that anything unusual would not stay secret for long. It took every ounce of her strength to drag the chest from the boat and along the dock to her cabin. Her hands were raw, her back screaming with the strain, but she didn't stop. Once the door closed behind her, she stood in the dim interior, her chest heaving, the tarp-wrapped shape looming in the middle of the floor. The small lamp cast shadows across the walls, turning the curves of the chest into strange silhouettes that seemed almost alive. She wasn't alone for long. A heavy knock shook the door, and she knew who it would be. Jonathan Reed had fished these waters as long as she had, his beard gone white, his frame still broad despite the years. He had been her husband's closest friend, and after the storm that stole her family, he had become the only person she trusted without hesitation. When she let him in, his sharp eyes fell immediately to the tarp. "What in God's name have you dragged home, Eliza?" he asked, his voice low, though curiosity crackled beneath it. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she moved to the chest and pulled the covering free. The sight silenced him. Together they circled it, their boots thudding softly on the worn floorboards, each detail drawing them deeper into awe. The chest's surface gleamed with streaks of bronze and green, the colors shifting with the lamplight. The ridges along its sides were marked with intricate patterns, symbols perhaps, though none either of them recognized. They were angular and fluid at once, the sort of markings that suggested meaning even if it couldn't be read. "It looks alive," Jonathan murmured, his weathered hand hovering just above the metal before he dared touch it. When his fingers brushed the surface, his eyes widened. "It's warm." Eliza felt it too when she laid her palm against it. A faint hum, steady as a heartbeat, thrummed beneath the metal. Something within the chest was not entirely dormant. They worked in silence, gathering the tools they had used 100 times before on stubborn traps and corroded gear: a hammer, a heavy knife, a pry bar. The chest resisted at first, as though reluctant to yield its contents. The lid was sealed tight, its seam crusted with barnacles and time. Eliza wedged the blade into the gap and hammered until the metal shrieked in protest. Jonathan braced the chest with his boot, the muscles in his arms straining. Inch by inch the seam widened, and from within a faint light began to seep. Eliza froze. It wasn't the dull reflection of lamplight. It was something else, something deeper. Golden and warm, it spilled through the widening crack, painting their hands an amber glow. Jonathan glanced at her, and she saw her own unease mirrored in his face. Still, neither of them stopped. With a final wrench, the lid groaned open. The lamp flickered, almost drowned by the radiance that spilled into the room. Inside, nestled against scraps of decayed cloth, lay a pearl larger than any Eliza had ever imagined. Its surface was smooth as polished glass, its glow soft yet alive, shifting as though it carried within it the rhythm of the tide. The light pulsed, warm and steady, filling the cabin with a sense of impossible wonder. Beside the pearl were bundles of parchment, bound with cord so ancient it crumbled at her touch. The pages were covered in lines of symbols, the same style as those carved into the chest. The ink, if it was ink, had not faded despite the centuries. The words flowed in patterns that bent the eye. Spirals and sharp angles mingled in ways that seemed both alien and deliberate. Eliza could not read them, but she felt them pressing against her mind, whispering of a knowledge too vast to grasp. Jonathan exhaled slowly, the sound almost reverent. "This isn't from any shipwreck I've ever seen." "No," Eliza whispered, her voice barely her own. "It's older." The pearl glowed between them, steady as a sunrise caught in stone. Eliza felt awe bloom in her chest, mingled with a sharp edge of fear. This was no ordinary catch, no simple gift of the sea. It was a secret older than the village, perhaps older than the world she knew. As she stood there in the golden light, she knew that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. For days after they had opened the chest, Eliza felt as though the very air around her had changed. The pearl's glow lingered in her memory long after it was wrapped in thick cloth and hidden in the darkest corner of her cabin. The parchments, brittle and strange, lay beside it, bound in a wooden box she kept beneath the floorboards. But, though she tried to go about her work as usual, casting her nets, mending ropes, her mind was never far from the weight of what she had brought ashore. At first, she thought the secret was safe. Jonathan came often, sometimes under the pretense of sharing a cup of coffee, other times just to sit quietly in her cabin. Neither of them spoke openly of the pearl, as though silence might shield it from the world. Yet the village was a place where nothing stayed hidden long. Eyes lingered a little too long when she passed. Conversations faltered when she stepped into the store. Eliza told herself it was her imagination, but the unease grew heavier with each day. One morning, while unloading her catch at the dock, she noticed two young men leaning against a post, their nets untouched, their gaze fixed on her. When she met their eyes, they smiled too quickly, and the smile did not reach their eyes. Later that day, she overheard an old woman whisper to her neighbor, "She brought something back from the rocks. I saw her dragging it up the dock, heavy as a coffin." The words carried like sparks in dry grass. By evening, everyone knew that Eliza had brought something unusual home. Strangers began to appear not long after. A man with a scarred face docked a sleek boat at the edge of the harbor, claiming to be a trader. He lingered too long near her cabin, asking casual questions about unusual finds, his gaze sliding past her to the door as though he might glimpse something through the cracks. Another stranger appeared 2 days later, a woman in a red cloak who claimed to be looking for work, but whose eyes were sharp and searching. Eliza said little to either of them, but inside she felt the tide of danger rising. The first true warning came at night. She had been sitting in her rocking chair, listening to the hiss of the tide, when she noticed a folded scrap of paper slipped under her door. The words were scrawled in uneven ink, blurred by damp. "Everything from the sea belongs to the sea. Don't keep what isn't yours." Her hand trembled as she read it. She burned the note in her lamp flame, but the smoke lingered long after, bitter and accusing. Jonathan tried to reassure her when she showed him the memory of it the next morning, but she saw the worry in his eyes. "People talk, Eliza," he said quietly. "Curiosity grows faster than weeds. Best you stay cautious." The second warning came more cruelly. She returned from a day on the water to find her nets slashed to ribbons piled in a heap at the end of the dock. The cuts were clean, sharp, not the work of accident or age. It was the sort of wound made by a deliberate hand. Eliza stood over them, the gulls crying overhead, her jaw tight. Her tools had always been safe in this village. Fishermen respected one another's gear as they respected the sea. This was something new, a violation that carried a message sharper than the knife that had made it. From then on, she could not move through the village without feeling the weight of stares. When she entered the shop for flour and coffee, the keeper hesitated just a heartbeat too long before serving her. Men mended their nets in silence as she passed, their conversation resuming only after she had gone. And in the evenings, when she sat on her porch, she heard voices just beyond the lamplight, low murmurs that fell silent the moment she opened her door. The whispers grew bolder with each passing day. A fisherman named Curtis, known more for his debts than his catch, stopped her outright on the dock. "They say you found something out there," he said, his smile tight. "Something worth more than a lifetime of nets. Funny thing, how treasures don't stay hidden long." His words cut deeper than the knife in her ruined gear. She walked past him without reply, but his gaze followed her, sharp as a hook. By the end of the week, it was not just the villagers. The strangers at the harbor multiplied. They lingered at the tavern, asking too many questions in voices just loud enough to carry. They spoke of rare artifacts, of pearls that glowed, of writings from forgotten worlds. None of them said the word Atlantis, but Eliza heard it in the hunger of their voices. She returned home each evening with her heart tight in her chest. The pearl lay hidden, the parchments untouched, but the weight of them pressed heavier with each day. She knew now that the sea had not given her a gift freely. It had given her a burden, one that the world would claw and scrape to claim. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters and the tide hissed against the shore, Eliza sat with Jonathan in the dim light of her cabin. They spoke little, both of them listening to the silence beyond the walls. It was no longer the quiet of peace. It was the quiet before a storm. And Eliza, staring at the place where the pearl lay hidden, knew with a clarity that chilled her. The whispers would not fade. They would only grow louder until someone decided to claim what she had brought up from the deep. The tension in the village thickened with each passing day. What had begun as whispers had hardened into pointed questions, sharp glances, and footsteps that trailed Eliza more often than coincidence could explain. She could feel it every time she walked the narrow path to the dock, eyes on her back, voices dropping into silence as she passed. The weight of suspicion pressed against her like a storm building far offshore. It was not only villagers anymore. The strangers who had begun to drift into the harbor no longer pretended at casual interest. They lingered openly near her cabin, their gazes bold and heavy with unspoken demands. At night, she heard boots on the sand outside, the faint creak of the porch boards. Once, when she opened the door with her lantern raised, she saw the outline of a man in the mist, tall, narrow, hesitating only a moment before fading into the dark. The pearl, hidden beneath its layers of cloth, seemed to pulse louder with each intrusion. Its glow lived in her mind even when she did not look upon it. The parchments whispered in her thoughts, though she could not read their words. What had first filled her with awe now pressed down like a burden. One afternoon, as she returned from the dock with a sack of flour over her shoulder, she found a knife embedded in her doorframe. A note was pinned beneath it, the words scrawled in a hand she did not recognize. "Give it up, or the sea will take what it gave." Her breath froze in her chest. The knife was new, sharp, its handle wrapped in leather, a tool meant for hands far stronger than a fisherman's. That evening, Jonathan came to her cabin, his face drawn and grim. He carried rope over one shoulder, a pretense for the eyes that might be watching, but when the door shut behind him, his voice was low and urgent. "It can't stay here, Eliza," he said. "They'll tear this place apart to find it. Strangers, neighbors, it doesn't matter. Curiosity has turned to hunger, and hunger will turn to violence." She sat heavily at the table, her hand pressed to her forehead. "It's a gift," she murmured. "The sea gave it to me. To us. To throw it away." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "It's not throwing it away. It's putting it where it can be safe. You and I both know the village can't hold a secret like this. The museum in the city can. They'll protect it, study it, give it a place beyond the reach of greedy hands." Eliza's chest tightened. The thought of parting with the pearl stung like salt in a wound. She had not sought it, had not asked for it, but it had come to her all the same. In the glow of its light, she had felt chosen, seen by the sea in a way she had not been in years. To give it up felt like cutting away a part of herself, like surrendering the only thing that had broken the endless gray of her life. And yet, she could not ignore the truth in Jonathan's words. Already the threats were at her door. Already the village's trust, fragile as glass, was cracking beneath the weight of greed. If she kept it, the pearl would not only destroy her, but burn everything around her as well. The silence stretched between them, the only sound the steady crackle of the lamp flame. Outside, the tide hissed against the sand, insistent, as if echoing the urgency in Jonathan's plea. At last, Eliza spoke. Her voice was low but steady. "We'll take it to the city, to the museum. But we go on our terms, when the tide favors us, and when the eyes watching are least prepared." Jonathan nodded once, the lines of his face easing only slightly. "At first light tomorrow, then. We'll leave before they wake." Eliza rose and crossed the room to the corner where the pearl lay hidden. She touched the cloth that wrapped it, feeling the warmth seeping through the layers, steady as a heartbeat. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the glow pulse against her palm. Then she whispered, as if the sea itself could hear, "What you gave me, I will protect, even if it means letting you go." That night, she did not sleep. She sat in her chair by the window, listening to the tide's endless breath, waiting for the first pale thread of dawn. The tide was still rising when Eliza and Jonathan pushed the siren away from the dock. The bundle lay hidden beneath layers of rough canvas and thick rope, secured in the stern, its weight heavier than anything they had carried before. The village was silent behind them, its narrow lanes asleep, but Eliza knew that silence was fragile. By the time the sun was high, people would notice their absence, and suspicion would follow like gulls behind a trawler. The pre-dawn air was cold, clinging to her skin, damp with mist. Eliza's hands were steady on the tiller, but inside her chest a restless current pulled hard. Every sound seemed sharper than it should. The soft slap of the water against the hull, the creak of the oarlocks, the low cough of the engine. Jonathan sat opposite her, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon, the lines of his face drawn tight. Neither spoke. Words seemed dangerous now, as if the sea itself might carry them back to listening ears. As they slipped beyond the headland, the water opened into wider channels. The mist thinned, and the faint blush of dawn bled into the sky, painting the waves with pale rose and steel gray. For a moment, Eliza allowed herself to breathe, but the sense of unease did not leave her. Each shadow on the water could be another boat. Each cry of a gull felt like an alarm. By midday, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain from the south. Dark clouds loomed, and the swell grew restless, lifting the siren higher with each wave. Jonathan worked the bilge pump as water sloshed across the boards. They ate little, a few mouthfuls of bread and smoked fish in the shelter of a rocky cove, before pushing on. Their conversation was sparse, practical. The route to the city, how to avoid the larger ports where questions would be asked, how to explain their presence if confronted. The first sign of pursuit came in the late afternoon. A sleek boat appeared far behind them, a dark silhouette against the silver sea. It did not move like a fisherman's craft. Its bow cut the water with too much precision, too much speed. Eliza's throat tightened. She nudged the siren closer to the coast, steering into shallower waters where larger vessels would hesitate to follow. Rocks jutted up like black teeth, waves breaking white around them, but she guided the boat with the skill of decades, slipping through channels only she and Jonathan knew. When at last she glanced back, the dark silhouette had fallen behind, lost in the shoals. That night they anchored in a sheltered inlet, cliffs rising high around them. The sea beyond murmured like a giant in sleep, restless but distant. They took turns keeping watch, each dozing lightly while the other scanned the shadows for movement. Eliza's ears strained for the sound of oars, of boots scraping against rock, but the night passed quietly. Still, sleep brought little peace. In her dreams she saw the Pearl glowing beneath the waves, its light both a beacon and a curse. At first light they set out again. The sea stretched wide before them, the coastline fading into a thin line behind. The journey grew harder as the hours passed. The swell deepened, wind tearing foam from the crests, rain spitting against their faces. Jonathan's beard dripped with salt water, his arms taut with the strain of the ropes. Eliza's back ached, her hands raw, but she did not falter. The Pearl weighed on her mind as much as it weighed on the boat, a silent passenger urging them onward. By midday of the second day, the haze on the horizon thickened, resolving slowly into shapes, masts, towers, the faint outlines of buildings. The city. Relief washed through her chest, sharp and fleeting, for she knew the danger was not yet gone. The harbor was busy, ships crossing paths in an endless tangle of movement. Larger vessels rolled past, ferries thick with people, their decks bustling. Eliza guided the siren to the smaller dock, where a man in a dark coat waited. The handoff was swift, quiet. Together they carried the bundle to a nearby warehouse, the air heavy with the smell of tar and salt. Eliza unwrapped the cloth layer by layer, and when the Pearl's light spilled into the dim space, the man's sharp intake of breath told her what she already knew. This was something beyond price. He examined it with reverence, confirmed its rarity, its impossible size, the strange parchments that accompanied it. The agreement was made. The museum would take it. It would be guarded, studied, preserved. Eliza would be remembered as its finder, her name etched into history beside it. A sum was promised, enough to ease her remaining years, But the money was not what steadied her chest. It was the thought that the pearl and the parchments would no longer draw knives to her door, no longer whisper danger through her walls. When she and Jonathan returned to the Siren, the city behind them already fading into haze, Eliza felt both lighter and emptier. The pearl no longer pressed at her chest, but its absence left a hollow space she could not ignore. Still, as the boat turned toward the long stretch of sea that led home, she knew the choice had been right. The sea had given her a gift. Now she had returned it to a place where it could not be stolen. The journey had tested her, scarred her, but it had not broken her. She had endured, as she always had, with salt in her veins and the endless horizon before her. The return voyage felt unlike the journey that had taken Eliza to the city. The Siren rode lighter now, freed of the burden she had carried in her stern. The sea, calmer than it had been in days, seemed almost to acknowledge the change. Each swell lifted the boat gently, the salt air soft on her face. Jonathan sat opposite her in silence, his hat pulled low, his hands resting easy on his knees. There was no need for words between them. The sea itself had heard everything that mattered. Eliza watched the horizon as the coastline slowly re-emerged from haze, its familiar cliffs and coves painted in late sunlight. A hollow space tugged at her chest where the pearl's glow had once burned. She had given it up willingly, but its absence was still keen. Yet, beneath the emptiness was relief, steady and undeniable. No longer would knives be pressed into her doorframe. No longer would shadows linger outside her cabin at night. The pearl's light belonged now to a place where no greed could smother it, and in that thought there was peace. By the time the Siren nosed back into the village harbor, dusk was falling. People moved along the dock, tying off lines, coiling nets, their voices carrying over the water. Heads turned as Eliza guided the boat in, but the glances were different now. The sharp suspicion that had haunted her before had dulled. The rumors had lost their weight. Whatever treasure they had imagined, it was no longer here to chase. A few nodded in greeting, cautious but not hostile. Life, it seemed, had shifted back into its familiar rhythms. Jonathan left her with only a brief nod, his rope slung over his shoulder as he made for his own cabin. Eliza lingered on the dock, running her hand over the Siren's rail, rough and weathered from years of salt and sun. The boat had carried her farther than she had thought possible. She whispered a quiet word of thanks to it before making her way up the path. Her cabin was just as she had left it, though it felt larger somehow without the pearl hidden in its corner. She set down her small bag and poured herself a cup of coffee, the bitter scent grounding her. Stepping onto the porch, she lowered herself into the old rocking chair, the one that had belonged to her husband. The wood creaked in the same familiar way, a sound that had always been part of her evenings. The horizon burned gold and rose as the sun dipped toward the water, the waves catching the colors and scattering them into 1,000 shifting patterns. Eliza cradled her cup and watched the day slip into twilight. She thought of the pearl then, not with sharp longing, but with a steady warmth. Somewhere in a grand hall in the city, its light was shining still, captured for the world to see. Her name would be etched beside it, her story tied to it forever. That was enough. She reached into her pocket and drew out the folded letter she had been given before leaving the city. The museum's crest was pressed into the corner, the handwriting neat and careful. "We are honored to safeguard this extraordinary discovery. Your name will be remembered alongside it. You are welcome, always, should you wish to see it again." Eliza had read it a dozen times, but each word rooted deeper into her heart, reminding her that she had not been forgotten, not swallowed whole by years of solitude. The sounds of the village drifted faintly on the evening air. Children's laughter running down the shore, the clink of tools put away, the low murmur of voices calling to one another. Life went on, just as it always had. Yet Eliza knew she was not the same. She had carried the sea's secret, and though she had let it go, its mark would remain with her always. The sun slipped lower, the water stilling into a calm mirror, the first stars pricking through the blue. Eliza finished her coffee and set the cup on the railing, her eyes on the endless horizon. The chair rocked gently beneath her, the tide whispering its eternal rhythm just beyond. For the first time in years, she felt no weight pressing at the edges of her thoughts. The Pearl was safe. The village was quiet. And the sea, constant and vast, breathed before her as it always had. She knew she was only one small part of its endless story, but for a brief, unrepeatable moment, it had chosen her. And that was enough. That was just one of many incredible stories the sea still hides. Want more? Subscribe, like, and share this video so others can enjoy it too.